Hey guys, Luke here again from Australian Off-Road. So carrying on with water, I just want to give you a bit of an overview in terms of our tank layouts and predominantly how we want you to fill the trailer around water to try and get some kind of good ball weight at the front, ideally around 10%. So as you can see, we're on a Quantum Plus. I'm going to try and work down this driver's side, kind of pinpointing where each tank is positioned. As you can see, we've got fillers here. Now, disregarding this one, a standard trailer with two water tanks in terms of quantum upwards would have a front tank and a rear tank. So this one just bypass for the minute, we'll come back to that one. But as I say, front tank would be predominantly positioned here in front of the axle, and then rear tank would be positioned just behind the axle. So this is tailored in the way we've designed the trailer for weight distribution. If you fill both tanks, being that both tanks are 140 capacity, you've got realistically no impact on the ball weight to a degree. And so again, 140 at the rear, 140 at the front, that is a standard scenario. Yep. If we say we are working on filling both tanks, let's just say for a trip where we're at a last destination, we've put full water in, we would tend to say work off your front tank, for the reasoning being that we're trying to keep some weight here and then we're alleviating the weight out of this one first, which in turn means that this weight is getting reduced forward, keeping weight backwards to try and counter-lever your ball. Because we know that with your storage lockers, obviously you've got two storage areas in this particular trailer here, you've also got a big storage area in this front, which in turn means it's quite easy to get caught up on adding everything in these lockers and putting a lot of weight forward. So water can be a big bonus on how you end up with your ball weight around that 10%. Yep, so that's first scenario, again working off two standards. Now if you option in a grey water tank, which is a very common option, this rear tank would get split into two separate tanks. So that becomes an 80-60 conversion as we call it. So the 60 front portion of that tank is now holding your internal sink and shower. The 80 is what you've got left of normal water. So if you think straight away, if we fill this 80 litre water tank that we've now got and the front 140, your ball weight is naturally going to be heavier now because you've got a bigger capacity forward. So this is kind of where, as we take you through that finalisation process and talking you through options, it's always good to see some kind of option on the rear bar around the grey water tank, which means in turn, regardless of whether it's dual spares, extra jerry can holders, it just means you can put some additional weight on the rear to try and counter-lever what we've done here with this tank. Yep. So with, again, around this grey water, because it is such a common option, but a lot of people get confused around it, what that means is that your internal sink and shower is going to drain into that tank. So if you didn't have a grey, the outlet on the side here is where the water would naturally come out from. Again, just around them internal features, not external. So the grey water allows you to capture that water, so if you're in national parks and things like that, where obviously there is getting laws there where you've got to capture and contain water, that's the option that you would be taking to try and cover that. Now touching on, obviously we've touched on weight sides of things and where things are positioned. The tank that is right at the front of the trailer is the black tank. So this is going to be what's coming through your toilet. Now as we touched on in the previous video, in a standard scenario before you do anything with water tanks and toilet systems, your rear tank is where the drawer is for your toilet, and that doesn't change. So if you're flushing the toilet on a normal system, you're drawing the water from the rear tank, which is starting off right at the back, and you're drawing it into this front tank. Now this confuses a lot of people why we put the black tank at the front, because obviously if you are filling it full, that's 140 litres that you've got potentially sitting in this front area, which is going to obviously have a ripple effect onto this wall. The reasoning why we do it this way is that 140 capacity is not necessarily designed for you to fill it to 140 every time before you empty it. The principle of this is we give you a big capacity, but if you're sat somewhere stationary and you don't want to be leaving every 2 or 3 days to have to empty toilets, you know you've got a good lengthy period there where you can fill that before it's going to become full. But as a rule of thumb, as I tell everyone, what we always advise with this is fill it to where it's convenient to drain it. So if you're on the road quite a lot and you're passing dump point and it's convenient, get rid of this regardless, because it's all weight that you don't need to be carrying at the front. And if you think now we know that the toilet runs off the rear tank, naturally we start with our weight here because the black tank is going to be empty. We start flushing the toilet, which then transfers it down to here. So if you like, it's a bit of a seesaw. You're starting at the rear and you're starting to level yourself out. This will then get emptied, which will mean the weight will go straight to being backwards again, because that tank's got to have water in it, otherwise you can't flush your toilet. So it is all designed on that philosophy that we start with the weight at the back, we slowly transfer a bit forward as we flush, but this gets drained as frequent as possible. Even if that's 40-50 litres, it's all weight that doesn't need to be there, which means then you straight away go back to having offset weight in the rear tank. And this would be the same principle for if you were only going away for a couple of days. You're obviously not going to carry 280 litres of water or 220 in a grey scenario. So in turn, you might only fill that rear tank. And that would be the tank that you would always fill first to keep weight backwards. This for me is more, I'm going to fill this if I know either A, I'm going off the beaten track for a long while and I need full capacity, or B, I'm going to need more than 80 litres or 140 litres, which in turn then you might only half fill this. And then you would then work back to the principle that you'd be using this first and keeping the weight in this rear tank. So hopefully, I know I'm kind of moving my hands a lot, but hopefully that shows where the tanks are positioned. So rear tank, front tank, black tank. Now this one, which we tried to scrub out earlier, is showing one of the optional additional 60s. Now this one has two forms basically. You can either option this tank in to share the plumbing, where then it's linked in with these two in terms of plumbed into one water pump, and then you basically pick which tank you draw from, whether it be rear, middle or front. Or you isolate this tank as a drinking format, which then means it's completely standalone away from these two tanks, and then it has its own tap inside the trailer and its own pump and filter. So we class that as a pure drinking water tank. Now again, because this is positioned above the axle, this isn't going to have a huge bearing on the ball weight, so not really detrimental in this side. Overall weight will increase in the trailer because you're adding that weight in, but you're not impacting this area too much. So that gives you a bit of an overview on tanks. The last thing I wanted to just quickly show you is each tank can be individually drained. So this is whether you've got 3 tanks, 2 tanks, each tank can individually be drained by its drain point. So if we look at the front tank for instance, so just underneath here, you've got the river access feature at the front, which we have done a separate video on how to use that. But if you see, we've also got a tap which is closest to the tank, which is this little white tap here. So if I turn this tap on, that means that that water is going to get drained out of that front tank. So that covers your front. The rear tank, depending on what setup it's got, may, like this one, have 2 outlets. Now this is because this one's got a grey water tank. So the first outlet closest to me here is going to be for the grey water tank. And then similar to the front tank, the tap closest to the tank itself is to drain the water. So if I want to drain the 80 litres out of this particular trailer, I would open up this big tap at the rear. If I don't want to capture my grey water, or I want to drain the grey water tank if it's full, I would take this cap out and open this tap up. And then on the additional 60, these two are running down the driver's side for the front and the rear. The additional 60 that goes in the middle is going to have a tap on it, but it's actually going to be more accessible from the passenger side. So you tend to climb under similar to where your suspension is, because it's obviously above the axle, and you'll see a blue tap on there where you open that tap, you can drain that water. Everyone's got their own take on whether it's best to store water in the trailer when you're storing them for long periods or drain. I won't touch on that because it will create a big conversation. But obviously if you are someone that's draining water tanks when you get home, like I say, driver's side for 2 standard tanks, the additional 60 will be on the passenger side, and it will have a drain on there if you look underneath. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, give us a ring and we'll try and explain in person.